Well, welcome both of you to the marketing matchup. I'm really, really pumped for this episode because it's not very often that I get a chance to dive in with two people as incredible professionals that both of you seem to be and have shown me to be. But also in the sense that the two of you are sitting in a very unique spot in the industry. Right now, as you know, two mega trends are happening. There's obviously the outside capital coming in, trying to invest in RIA firms and help them ramp up and be better at what they do and increase value. And then there's also the other mega trend, which is this push towards organic growth. And so you have these two facets there. And most of these firms that you're involved with, both Constellation Wealth and Arax, are investing in firms, and they are relying on the two of you to be like almost consultants or outside consigliaries to help solve for the growth issues, whether it's recruiting advisors, helping with M&A, or getting down to brass tacks with organic growth marketing. And so having your perspective, a little different than having someone's an embedded CMO at an organization, this should be a fun conversation, and I'm looking forward to diving in.
Same here. Erica, tell me again your title. I'm curious.
So
we're similar.
So I'm on the advisory team at Constellation Wealth Capital and supporting organic growth consulting. We're set up with basically 6 different disciplines at Constellation Wealth Capital under the advisory team, and mine is organic growth.
So let's do this, because Amy, you beat me to the punch. We always tee it up this way. I want each of you to just give us a quick introduction, where you're coming from, what your background is, and what you bring to the table for the growth discussion and marketing discussion. So, Erica, since you already started down that path, why don't you dive right in? So, Erica Rodrigues, take it away here.
Sure. So just to provide a little background on myself, I started my career off in the supporting insurance association. So really the back office, operations, marketing events, et cetera, for a few years. And then I moved over to Pershing, where I joined the program management team within the marketing communications department there. And over the next 16 years, held various different roles across Pershing and BNY. And then about 2 years ago, moved over to Constellation Wealth Capital to help support the organic growth consulting business.
And Amy, your turn.
So I spent many years at Arax Brown, running South Florida, so between the Deutsche Bank and then Raymond James years of Arax Brown. I was there around 16, 17 years, and I ran that South Florida division for Arax Brown. About 5 years ago, I moved from Florida and moved to the independent space for work. I was doing M&A for a firm, Apollon Wealth, and also, moving from a large organization and then being at a small growing organization, then you find, you've got to really build these things, right? This doesn't just exist, right? And then if you're promising and you're on the M&A side and you're recruiting, you need to really deliver on those things. So I became kind of part of building some of the, things that were making Apollon great. And then I ended up joining back with Haig Arian, my former CEO from Arax Brown, who I'd worked with for many years, when he founded Arax with Redbird Capital. And so it's been about 2.5 years now. I'm Chief Growth Officer here, and that runs the gamut from M&A focused activity and also organic growth activities.
Well, you take a look at defining or redefining what growth could entail for a company. Obviously, it's no longer simply about just acquisitions or just organic. Advisory recruitment is obviously a big deal. Even making sure you have the right kind of staff to support whatever efforts you're trying to scale is a big deal. And so the two of you helping firms within your firm's portfolios solve for that creates a lot of work for the two of you, but also you probably have a different worldview in terms of what's going on. And so I'm going to kick off and ask the question, and Erica, I'll pick on you first here. What do you see as the biggest challenge and when it comes to growth and growth marketing for RIA firms today?
It's a great question. I think it depends, right? It depends on what stage of the growth trajectory you are as an RA. You could be a very large one, and so your challenges are a little bit different in trying to stay on trend with some of the lead gen, building out your own organic pipeline. Or it could be that you're really just a smaller RA, really looking to grow, and you're still building out what your marketing organization should look like, or your organic growth organization could look like, and that's business development, including. And so there's definitely a lot of challenges across all of our portfolio firms today in terms of what's next and what's going to get them to the next point of their growth trajectory.
And Amy, how would you see that? Does anything jump out at you?
I see why you paired me up with Erica, because I'm always like, it depends on
Right.
the exact scenario and life cycle of where you find yourself in terms of like what you need to focus on. And maybe that's because we're both in sort of fast growing organizations as well. And so you kind of need to pick your spots. But I think, Joe, we've talked a number of times that I find a lot that even in what we would think in the independent space, you know, even a 5 billion AUM firm is a good sized firm. They rarely have an actual head of marketing, which in my position is really exciting because what we're doing from a marketing perspective is great for those folks, right? And we have a lot of like low-lying fruit to do something with.
Well, and I think,
agree.
Yeah, and I think you talk about low-hanging fruit, Amy, right? So you think about all the different things.
Yeah.
And I wasn't correcting. You're
right.
I'm repackaging here because when I think about low-hanging fruit, people say, "What could I do first? What should I be doing first?" Sometimes there's low-hanging fruit which you go for because it's quick wins, and sometimes those can be distractions. But I want to talk about that since you begged the question. What are some of those areas of low-hanging fruit that you think sometimes go overlooked, where firms can make a little dent in their marketing mix, advance their communications and PR strategy? What are those things? Either one of you have an instinct here? You want to jump on it? Erica, you're nodding along.
Yeah. I can jump in here. I think again, depending on where you are in your phase, but initially identifying either a marketing strategy or a goal. I mean, it sounds so simple, but that's where you need to start, right? Understanding where do you want to grow? How do you want to grow? And understanding who your client base is. That's usually where I suggest people start or firms start to really truly build out what the next phase of growth should look like. And then it's like, do you start with a marketing agency? Do you hire a head of marketing or maybe a more junior person to start kind of getting that ball rolling? But those, I think it's very simple, but sometimes it's just such a big effort to that people don't understand where to start.
Yeah, it's a challenge. Amy, where's some of the low-hanging fruit that you see?
Well, I think although the questions that you mentioned are simple, actually executing on it is not that simple, right? And it takes like making a concerted effort, having the team in place, and being persistent for like a while on what you're trying to accomplish. And so where there's lots of opportunity is, you know, you've got an advisor or staff dabbling in marketing, you know, writing some commentary, pushing it out. And of course, like no one from our field typically is an expert in marketing, right? And RIAs have started with like advisor teams and their sales assistants and investment people. And so now, you know, we can come in with real expertise on the marketing side and actually put a playbook together for them and help them execute on it, right? It's the consistency. It's not like, of course, there are like secrets and there are like, you know, awesome ways of doing things that some know better than others, but like comes down to the consistency and execution. So if you can help with that, you can do a lot.
So I'm going to give you a take, and I'm curious to see if you think this is as spicy or not. I don't think if you're a $1 billion+ RIA that you're serious about growth unless you hire somebody to lead your marketing. Point blank. I don't think you can be committed long-term for sustainable growth unless you have someone in that position. Do you agree or disagree?
I'll hop in. I think that we are seeing, that's why we're seeing people interested in partnering with us. It was they actually recognize that like there's certain areas of expertise they don't have and they don't have the bandwidth for, right? And that's probably I'm sure you see that as well, Erica. Like, so they're serious about growth, which is why they're partnering with us, because they're going, we've made it this far, but like I need help to get to the next level.
And
I
Erica?
couldn't agree more. I think for sure that having somebody on staff that is dedicated to really helping you grow your business is imperative, but it's understanding when the right time is to add to staff and add that resource, right? And I think oftentimes you see it happen organically where you have the leadership team going, I want to do this, but I don't know how, I can't do it anymore. I can't actually keep this in-house. So I agree. And I think there's a time, I'd like to say as you get a little bit bigger, it makes sense to continue to grow out your team. But in the initial phases, it might help partnering with a firm like yours, Joe. Not it's a plug, but you know what I mean? You're getting a lot more resources, without having to hire in-house for those, more sophisticated tactics and strategies.
Well, and I think you both hit on something where you're the solve for that, right? If you don't have that first discipline in-house, where you're someone who's a seasoned professional or empowered professional who can direct the marketing or growth process, then you have to solve for that. Again, maybe it's joining another firm, maybe it's leaning into a operation like one of yours, whether it's using an agency like mine, but you have to solve for that. You can't just keep going and hopefully that the magic keeps spinning on referrals or whatever it might be. You have to look for those other routes. And I think when we get there, I think the other question becomes, all right, well, if you're solving for this growth issue, whether you're plugging into a platform, you bring in other outside resources, you come down to, all right, what do I do? How do I kick this off? And in 2025, the different choices and the different things out there are a myriad. There's so many different things people could do and potentially get distracted by, also potentially be successful with. And both of you in your notes had some interesting things around what's sort of irreplaceable versus what might be overrated and so forth. I'm curious, Erica, will you take a look at where firms can start and what are the non-negotiables that the firms should be considering when they think about building out their marketing the right way, whether they do it alone or they sort of lean into a firm like yours? What are certain things that need to be in place?
I am constantly telling firms that messaging needs to be very clear and authentic to who they are, right? I think that's how you differentiate in this space because we're not a typical consumer brand, right? The RA space is so interesting and exciting and why we're probably all a part of it, right? Because it's still very much in my eyes in its infancy as it continues to grow and gain momentum. But what's happening now is there's so much saturation in the market. Understanding your message, being authentic to who you are is sometimes very difficult for firms to do and to articulate. So I am a big proponent of understanding your messaging, making sure it's clear, making sure your website reflects that your people know it and speak the same language, right? It sounds, again, simple, but it's not always that simple.
And Amy, where would you go with that when you think about what are table stakes, things you have to have in place?
Well, so I come to the marketing, part of this role fairly recently. I have a marketing team, luckily, that has a lot of experience that reports into me, right? But so I'm still learning as we go here. But I think, since we're really, what we're trying to create is more of like an agency, a marketing agency group at the Arax level that supports our 3 operating companies. And in everything you try to do, Joe, I focus on niche strategies a lot with advisors, but in everything you try to do, the website has to be right and the original messaging, right? You can't do anything else before you start with that, to Erica's point. And then because everything circles back to it. So obviously that's the first place to start. I guess I'll pause there. Yeah.
No, that's good. And I think, so as you talk about those foundational elements, obviously firms are looking at, do you get the messaging and the story right? And then do I worry about the delivery mechanisms? Do I build a chassis and making sure I'm doing the right things with my CRM, doing the right things with my website? So when I do start proactively trying to push digital campaigns or doing PR or content, that I'm actually getting out there in a productive way. And I think the answer is sort of it goes back to the old chicken or egg conundrum, right? Unfortunately, you have to do both really to be successful. And there's probably pathways while you get your chassis right. You could probably start building out content or building out a thought leadership or digital marketing strategy that can be deployed behind that. But most firms, almost, I think the biggest stumbling block isn't necessarily having a marketing officer or CMO on task, but more of a project manager, someone who can actually be that consigliere between maybe the executives and decision makers and the advisors that need the support. And so you think about that when you're getting in and advising your teams, right? This is more of a sort of a consultant question more than a marketing question. Like, how are you helping them triage the responses that they need to bring to advisors? How are you helping them organize the process? What are some of the things that you're doing at a firm level that you think adds value to the marketing and growth discussion in terms of making sure it gets done? Erica, is anything happening at Constellation?
I mean, I think from my perspective and our perspective at Constellation, we're set up a little, I think, differently than Amy's team is, right? We're sort of here as consultative partners, an extension of their team, right? But ultimately, we're looking to help build the foundation so that they can feel comfortable growing. A lot of talk that's been happening lately, I think, at all various sizes and shapes of firms is, having an advisor experience person on staff, right? But that's, I think, fairly new, and is so important, right? When you think about growing, whether inorganically or organically, how these advisors are really equipped to help their clients, and so it's almost less burden on the marketing team to really drive those sort of tactics and strategies forward, but it's almost like a partnership between whether you're the head of organic growth or the head of advisor experience, whatever that looks like for your firm. It's actually a very important role.
Well, head of advisor experience, I think that you hit on something that I think really underscores the gist of how you get your marketing to excel. Both of you, in your notes, shared with me the idea that a lot of the success in marketing today comes down to the advisor delivery of it, or how the advisor shows up in that process. And Amy, when you think about bridging that gap between some of the ideas and things you're trying to centralize versus how it boils down to the individual advisor, what are some of the things that you think advisors should be doing to equip themselves for success? I mean, one of the things you wrote in your notes was about, like, for example, exploiting a niche. What other advice would you have in that area?
Well, I think in our case, we are trying to take some of that execution burden off of the actual teams, right? So a lot of what we've spent the last 6 to 8 months on is setting up the infrastructure in terms of delivering out content and, so an enterprise level, marketing solution, curating the library of content, just sort of all of those table stakes things that actually across the ecosystem advisors were doing on their own. Some great, some mediocre. There were already a lot of niche growth strategies, some with some function, execute, form around it, and then others just because the advisors are really good at, that networking in that area. So we're able to come in then. So we're setting that foundation of how everything gets delivered, and then coming into those niche categories and building playbooks around those, and then adding them into the system to deliver that out, right? So we're really focused on creating all that process, which is happening behind the scenes, in order to take some of that burden off of them individually.
And I'm pretty sure the answer to my next question from both of you will be, it depends, but I want to go fishing on this one. And so basically, I think about, you talk about some of the things you're doing to take the burden of execution off the advisor, even though in a lot of cases, the end game client's relating with the advisor as opposed to the parent brand. How do you go about helping each of the firms that are partner with your organizations to decide whether to emphasize firm level brand, firm level marketing, firm level growth strategies versus the advisor led approaches? I know it's always a mix, but is there a certain size inflection point? Is it a function of how many different distinct niches the firms have? I'm curious. Let's explore this. How do you figure out when to lead with sort of the big B brand versus the little B brand with the advisors? Which way does that go? Erica, what are your thoughts?
Depends. No. I think a lot of that comes down to the firm's culture, to be honest. And I think there are firms within our portfolio that very much are lead with advisor and we're not going to push the big brands, right? Because this business is a relationship business and we want our advisors to be front and center, and that's how they approach things. And then there's others that are very much, this is the brand and this is how we want to show up to our all clients. So it has to be authentic to who you are as a firm, because otherwise it doesn't feel authentic to the client. And that's really where we are today as an industry. There are very different RA firms out out here doing very different things, but being successful nonetheless. So you have to, and my role is to help each of those firms be authentic and create those opportunities as they come, but not force them into a position where it doesn't work for them, right? And so, it depends.
And Amy, where do you see the ebb and flow taking shape within the organization? I'm sure, again, it depends, but where do you see it stack up in terms of where the advisor picks up, where the big firm leaves off?
Well, I think across the board, we're streamlining, brand to as much as we can, so that if when you're creating something centrally, like to simplify that, right? So that we can actually really proactively deliver a lot of this from like a regular market commentary and planning comment, like all of those sorts of everyday kind of interactions with clients, right? So that is sort of going to be somewhat streamlined across the brands. But then when it comes to the niche categories, even though it might be a niche started by one team, if they're working with, physicians, for example, right? And we're creating a playbook around that. So those conversations start with explain it to me, advisor, right? Tell me what is resonating when you're having these conversations. And you go through that whole consultative process to create a playbook and create presentation materials that they never had before, even though they have this niche, right? And then think about, can we do other campaigns, or is it whatever, events or social or all of those other pieces that might, create a process around this niche. But there's at least 4 or 5 other advisors in the ecosystem that also want to focus on physicians, right? And so then creating that playbook and process, and then also delivering to them how not just the advisor, but all of the resources of the firm cater to that niche, is then applicable across the ecosystem, right? So it's sort of it starts with the big brand and the niche, but then we kind of pull it together in order to try to replicate the impact of that.
Well, when you start thinking about the impetus behind all this and why firms are focused, you have to also go back to one of the big trends we talked about. I alluded to earlier, with the idea that there's so much money coming into the space for people looking to invest in firms, buy firms, merge them together. It's coming from banks, private equity, larger firms, but the money is chasing these deals. And I've heard on more than one occasion that the idea of M&A activity, private equity money, whatever, is putting a greater onus and focus on organic growth. And from your experience, when you're dealing with the companies that you're supporting, is there a sense of pressure about this? Is it or is it more about crystallizing and institutionalizing the growth process more now that you've got this institutional framework around it? Would you say it's more pressure or more forward-looking, if you had to characterize the vibes or feelings around what the onus is around organic growth?
I mean, I can jump in. I think it's not pressure. We're minority investors in growing RA firms, right? So what's drawn us to the firms that are in our portfolio today are that they have had healthy growth, and that the leadership has the right instincts to grow, and they're looking to get to the next level. So they're looking for us to help partner with them to get there. So they're hungry for it, right? It makes my job really fun, because they're interested in understanding what they can be doing differently to grow, and so it's it's not necessarily pressure. I think there's just this hunger to grow.
They're starved for help and support. Yeah. Amy, how would you take that? What's that feeling that comes across when they're looking for these resources?
Well, your question sort of around is the organic growth piece sort of like, is there pressure because of the PE involvement and everything? I mean, I will say that the organic growth metric is the top metric when you're talking about valuations, right? That any investors are looking at today. And so I don't know if that's pressure, but it's certainly what is valued the most, right, at this time. And so I think also because we are majority investors and we have concentrated portfolio of really 3 operating companies, obviously lots of different teams within those. But I think that's why we take more of like an ownership stance on strategically partnering with folks to execute on this, right? And so it's a little bit of a different dynamic, but it's definitely like part of our core deliverable from the holding company. I think, but you're still working, as Erica said, with advisors and their client relationships. I mean, from a historical perspective, Alex Brown, all of our history as leadership team members from the Arax level, it's always been about the advisor-client relationship, right? And that has to be upheld in everything that we're doing, right? So, which is why I'm looking at folks going, I want to deliver you leads, but for the type of client that you're really great at working with, right? Which is why we're talking about focusing on these niche strategies. Like, tell me what you do great, and then let's expand on it and put process around it. So, yeah, it's definitely a top priority for us, but we're really sensitive to how we approach it because that relationship is number one in what we're doing.
Well, in organic growth being the top metric for valuation, I think it probably goes for just about any business model, not just the financial services world. But I think it's why it's so clear and present. And I think it matters lots of succession questions, whether someone ever takes on outside money or ever merges is really important because it's still fundamentally in terms of how a founder might succeed the business to a junior advisor someday, things like that. So it's a real pressing issue for the industry, even if it's not driven by any one force. It really comes down to this is how you maximize value and build a business. And I think given that, I mean, organizationally, and given that you're able to see across multiple different firms, is there a growing sentiment in terms of what the budget should be for growth efforts within a firm? Is this something, and Amy's smiling because I asked this question on stage to her about a month ago at a conference. So, but everyone wants to know, I get asked all the time this question. I'm curious, is it a percentage? Is it a flat number? Is it, again, it could be dependent on where you're at in your growth trajectory, but how do you get a starting point to figure out how much should I be allocating towards this big picture growth issue? Erica?
You want to take it? You want me to go? Okay. Yeah. So I knew you were going to ask this question. And it's interesting because you see firms not spending nearly enough on marketing or allocating any money towards marketing. And then you see other firms doing a lot and maybe not doing it in the right way. So, I mean, ideally, right, depending on your growth stage and how big you are, 2 to 5% is the number that we sort of think about. But you want to be responsible with that money. And I think where we are today from a marketing perspective and how sophisticated some of the tools are that we have use of, right? We can report on some ROI where in the past you weren't able to. So people were a little bit more reluctant to give money towards marketing because it didn't necessarily equate to new business or growth. That's not where we are today. So, I think, again, depending on where you are in your growth trajectory, how big you are, really need to start with how much money am I willing to put towards growth, right? And set aside a budget and really be responsible with that budget and have a clear plan to use that money so that you can report on the KPIs and metrics that help leadership identify whether it was good investment or bad, right? So, I'd say 2 to 5%, but it could be more if it's a larger firm already having a proper foundation, a good size marketing team, and have already built out a lot of the things that we talked about earlier in our conversation.
Sure. Amy, what perspective do you have on this question?
Well, I agree with Erica. Like, you can spend money and not get it. I mean, so like targeting a dollar amount, I like shy away from or a percentage amount, because it's about, is it working? And so we are at a stage, where we're very much like a early growth investor, and we have that backing from our capital partners. And so I'm allowed to, test things out and obviously be really responsible about that. But I do get a little bit of leeway to sort of like go at it and really try to be creative, which is exciting and great right now, right? But obviously that doesn't last if you can't actually show results. So I don't know. It kind of depends, again, what stage you find yourself at. But I think the key is like just being really clear that you can't kind of dabble in it, right? You have to set a budget and say, like, we're going to actually try to make this work for 6 to 8 months. We're going to watch it. We're going to iterate on it, right? And have that concerted effort around it. And your point, I think, Joe, if someone comes to hire your firm, you have to have that person internally that's really like dedicated to that interaction on a regular basis. But that would be kind of my thoughts.
Well, and I think one of the things you're both hitting on, the idea of you want to make sure that whatever you're spending gets some sort of measurables, because frankly, as you're trying to grow, some things will hit and some things will miss. Mm-hmm. But if you can't measure to know what's working and what's not working, you don't know if you're putting good money after bad and so forth. And I think, so you take a look at the timelines for what's working. I think you talk about you can't just dabble at it, I think is the phrase you just used, Amy, which I like. Most people making the decisions around how long of a rope they're going to give a marketing program to take off, or frankly, even efforts to recruit advisors, whatever those timeframes are, don't always necessarily think about it in terms of what's natural for that activity. Convincing someone to sell their firm or an advisor to join your firm might have a different sales cycle than seeing how long of an impact you go from having a brand new brand in the market all of a sudden having meaningful gains in your SEO, for example. That's going to be many, many months versus maybe how quickly can you get your CIO on television, right? Mm-hmm. It's a different cycle for exposure and marketing and so forth. And I think there's somewhat of a detachment there. And I think the job, which is why fundamentally having someone internally who understands the process to be able to be a champion, say, hey, we need to give this 9 to 12 months, or we should be able to start seeing results in the next 2 to 3 months, and giving that framework allows firms to try things out in a sustainable way. What do you think of that? Does that make sense? Does that resonate in terms of how your firms are seeing things, that they're willing to give different leashes for different activities? Amy, how has that played out on your end?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking we've rolled out different prospecting tools, for example. All right. And I said right at the start, like, you can't just hand out random technology to people, right? And so to advisors and just say, go use it, right? And so even in that process, we handed out pilots. It takes a lot of time and effort working with advisors on those, seeing if they're using it. If you're not using it, we're going to move on to somebody else, right? And so I think really getting clear on, what the different avenues to pursue might be and what those timelines are, is important. And then going okay, am I comfortable with that? If we're going to invest in this area, and let it ride for 9 months and watch how it works, right? Or is there something else that we can focus on that I don't know, is a little bit sooner outcome, and I can measure that, and I like how that sounds better, right? Just choosing the right lane for where that founder or advisor is comfortable, but having very clear expectations about it, I think is probably super important. I mean, we're obviously doing a number of different things, and we have a whole team of 7, 8 people that are focused on these different aspects. So we're measuring constantly and then shifting, right? Yeah.
And Erica, how does it play out in your role when you think about the leash given to different opportunities?
Yeah, and I think very similar to what Amy's saying. When we're minority, so we're not telling anybody how to do it or when to do it, right? We're advising and guiding, and so some of these conversations are a little bit like, "Do you think that's working? Should we try something different?" And a lot of times it depends, right? It doesn't have to be just a lead gen program. It could be the events they're doing, right? You're spending a lot of money on events. Is that the right tactic for your audience? And understanding the target client is imperative in knowing what to do next, right? You talk about niche markets. How do physicians like to be, communicated with? That's very, very important when you're coming up with what are the right tactics, and then how much of a leash are you giving somebody to really execute on that? Because sometimes an event, for example, might not lead to any new business, but maybe two events will. Or maybe it's an event with some follow-ups and some, more communication, some more educations. Maybe, it's a webinar. There's a lot of different tools in the marketing cycle that help really to drive home what you're trying to do, which is gain new clients, right? Or bring a new advisor on, or whatever that might look like for your firm. But I think it all has to work together with making sure you're measuring the success, and that's how you can measure whether or not you're giving more leash or less leash.
So let's build off what Amy alluded to a moment ago. There's a lot of new tools out there. There's prospecting tools. There's testimonial and review platform support. There's AI tools. When you think about this mixed bag of shiny new objects, some of which I think are making a difference in some firms and some of which maybe still need to be sharpened, where do you see amongst this myriad of choice where advisors are having the most, forget about the success for a second, where are they most gravitated towards? Where are the most questions coming from? Where is that the real engagement? Because again, it was said earlier, sometimes certain things are only as good as whether they get used or not, as opposed to the overall efficacy. And so where's the advisor interest coming? Help me out. Like Amy, I'll start with you. Is it on the AI side of the equation? Is it the reviews? Is it the prospecting? Where are they in that game?
So, we're using those tools just to supplement the playbook, the niche, whatever that sort of program, typically like a niche program might be. So we're using those tools to just support whatever else we're doing, right? It's not the be all end all. It's just one piece of it. I find that, because we've partnered with relatively fast organic growing firms, which is part of our strategic, approach to who we wanted to partner with, there are naturally these niches in there. And so that's why I decided to focus on those, right? And it sort of, it looked like the right place to me to spend time and effort, right, with the ecosystem that we've built so far. And I found that just, in all their management meetings and conversations with advisors, that's really stood out to them. And it's become this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy of like having advisors or firms that are thinking about joining us really get excited about that approach. And I think it's somewhat unique, right? Like, because you can talk about, custodian lead, programs or smart asset or other programs like that deliver leads. And people ask about that sometimes, but usually when I start talking about like what we're doing around their niche, and almost every time we're getting on an initial call, like I already know that they actually do have a niche, but no marketing team or no process and no, right? And so they get really excited about that because it's like the thing that they never really could do before. They didn't have the team around them to do that. And it's like been in the back of their mind for the last 10 years that they wanted to do this, right? And so we're coming in going like, that's what we want to build on. And that's become something that I've gotten a lot of great feedback from. So I'm going to roll with that, right?
Awesome.
I'm like, all right, this is working. Yeah. People
know your audience. If they like it, keep giving it to them. And Erica, back to the question, you think about from where you see, where is the advisor interest or demand or curiosity coming in on those newfangled options, whether it's those review platforms or AI or prospecting tools or anything else that's sort of on the new frontier? Where do you see it popping up the most?
I think I would agree with everything Amy just said. And I think it's super smart in the way that you're approaching it. There's so many tools out there and they're all very exciting when you dig into what they can offer. If they are supplemented by a proper marketing strategy, right? Like you can't just say, let's partner with this new firm or a tool and think it's going to work and it's going to be magic. It's not, right? Because you need the marketing support and tactics to really make use of those tools. We have firms that, are leveraging Smart Asset and have built a great program around that, or custodian referral programs that, they're mega successful at leveraging. So again, it's about leaning into the things that are already a strong prospecting tool for them and seeing how we can help emphasize that.
I would say, Erica, though, I think, a lot of people ask about the referral programs, of course. It's what people have known before or heard of before. But even with those, those are not just, you just get leads, right? There's real purpose and effort that goes into it, establishing those relationships and building upon those. And so I just, none of this is an overnight, easy, you just get leads, right? Whatever.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, and I've said this before, so it sounds like I'm beating a drum, I am, because I think it's a really important point. If you're going to invest time and energy, whether it's Zoe Financial or Wiser Advisor or Smart Asset, if you're going to be part of that and enroll in those programs, you're going to obviously need to staff up enough to be able to triage those opportunities the right way. But also, I think it's a big miss that if you're going to go down that path, that you don't also invest in getting testimonial IQ or Wealth 10 or something, because if those people that originate in the digital world to find out about you are going to look for a digital piece of social proof that you're in business for the right reasons, you're credible, you're going to meet their needs. If someone comes to you because their friend told them about a great experience they have, their social proof and how they're going to validate you is going to be different than one of these engines. And I think more and more, the smartest firms, those that are able to get their arms around these things, they're going to pair that up, or they're going to get a testimonial IQ in place when people pull up Google reviews on your RIA after looking at Wiser Advisor or Smart Asset, whatever it might be, that they're going to be able to have that sense of validation, because otherwise it's a free-for-all, right? It's and with Smart Asset's cases, whoever picks up the phone first when they try to match with a live call, that's a big challenge. And so I think sometimes these pieces can be really unique and helpful on their own, but even better together when you start talking about the arrival of some of these new opportunities advisors have that didn't have 5-7 years ago. How would you react to that? Am I making sense, or does it feels like off track to you?
I'm thinking, I got to deal with the testimonial thing now, Joe. Well, because, if you're doing really, that extends to any approach that's digital, right? And so anything that's not a personal referral, that would apply to, essentially.
And I think 100% agree, Joe. And I've had definitely some firms asking about how to do the testimonials and what's the right, tactic there. I also think it depends on who your target is. If you're ultra high net worth, you're going to lean in on your friends and family to get those testimonials. And we've seen a lot of success in firms that don't, just launched the website, believe it or not, a year or two ago. So it's different audiences operate differently. And so that's kind of where we need to understand the niche, the market, et cetera, to figure out what's the right approach for each of the firms that we're working with.
So you think about the other points of validation. We talked about testimonials and referral engines and in Google reviews. I mentioned that a minute ago. But another area, and you both know this is near and dear to my heart, we built our agency on the back of PR, right? We do a lot of other things now. In the last 10 years, we've morphed into a full service agency. But 35 years ago, we started on the back of the belief that earned media could be a big differentiator in terms of how firms grow their presence, grow their business. Where does that come in the marketing and growth mix in terms of both what I would call the defensive posture of making sure you're telling your own story, but as well as the proactive side in terms of supporting the firm's sense of visibility and growth? And again, it's different for every firm. How do you see the firms you're closest to play with that? Where do they see value in telling their own story? Erica, I know you've got a wide range of firms and some new ones that have actually been in the headlines lately because of the acquisition your team just did. Answer that question for me. What's the role of PR in that overall mix?
I personally think it's ultra important to have the right PR partner to help them drive the branding messaging within our industry, and especially if you're interested in M&A and advisor recruiting, right? You have to. It's almost like you're really marketing towards like our industry, and it's not necessarily like if you're getting a Citywire article, it's not necessarily meant for the end client, but more so for our industry to understand who you are, what's your culture, why would I be interested in partnering with you or coming to your firm. So, I feel very, very strongly that these are things that not every RIA is doing. And I think it is exceptionally important.
And Amy, you've been in a few different places in your career where there's been folks at those firms that have taken a strong posture on PR. How does it play out today when you've got three brands that are obviously all majority owned by your firm, but have maybe different directions? How do you insert PR into that equation?
Well, yeah. So thus far, it's all been really within our industry, right? And more focused on the M&A strategy. I think maybe on a small scale in specific geographies for different firms, right? U.S. Capital Wealth has a really strong presence in Texas and Houston, and they're known in that geography, right? So like we've done, but I would say I'm curious, I could use some advice there, right? Like I think because of what you just mentioned, I haven't focused on that broader sort of brand PR because we go like, let's do that next, sort of, when we have a clearer vision on what that needs to look like. And we've focused much more within the industry. But yeah, I'd love to hear thoughts on how people are doing that well externally for their firms.
So I'll plug a piece of my own content. It's my own podcast. After all, I could do that, right? So a couple of weeks ago, I shared something on LinkedIn that talked about sort of the journey of PR and storytelling and why it matters at certain levels of where you're at, going from like the initiation of just visibility, and then you move to awareness, then trust, then credibility, and then you have a relationship, right? So, and that's just, and I sped through that, but I mean, there's an arc there, right, where you go from people don't like, for example, Constellation and Arax are two brands that were created out of thin air, right? And so who are these people? What are they doing? How do they fit in? Oh, one's a minority stakeholder, one's a majority stakeholder. And you go down this line trying to figure out that story. And then once people have a sense of who you are, then, well, why you? Why am I trusting you? Like, well, why partner with you? And that's a journey on a macro level, but it's become so much more personal when you talk about the B2C side, where there's people are literally turning over the $700,000 they made or $2 million they made to make sure it lasts so they can retire. It's a different decision, level of familiarity they want. That's where the relationship feeling comes in, where they've heard so much about you. Either they know you, they feel like they should know you. And that's something where, so Amy, to sort of answer your question back, it's like, all right, how do you figure out where that comes in? It comes down to really thinking about where you are with all your audiences. For certain audiences, like I say this all the time, there's no household names in the RIA industry. You might be household amongst ourselves in terms of, oh, everyone heard of, say, creative planning. They've done a good job. They're huge now, right? But the average customer on the street wouldn't know who they were if you just asked them what they did. And I think, and so in some ways, you might be a household name with advisors, but a relatively non-entity, say in a new market where you just showed up. And so you're actually in different parts of your journey for that PR story, which is why PR can be so powerful, because it could allow you to address multiple needs and multiple audiences with the same discrete activity. And so it's just something that we chew on a lot, and it's always changing in this world. So we're getting close to the end of our time together. And before I ask you both for your parting shot, I just wanted to say again, one of the things that really compelled me to want to pair you two together is because of not just the perspective you have currently in your roles. You're part of these companies, these platforms that are advising and optimizing RIA firms that are trying to do different things in different markets. But also you came to the table. I mean, Erica, your years at Pershing on the custodian side with the advisor service side, Amy, your years on the independent broker-dealer side. I think what's so important, so impactful when you talk about growth and marketing is people that really get the advisor and see up close from a business standpoint. It's really challenging. You go from one side, you go pie in the sky, big marketing ideas, and the other side, you're getting really down to brass tacks, understanding the fundamentals of these relationships. So I really appreciate what you're bringing to the table here today in terms of that lived experience, as well as understanding the realities of where you're trying to move these firms. So I thank you for that. We're at the point in our podcast right now where each of you get a chance at parting shot. Anything you want to say in terms of ideas for the future, what you're looking out for, any predictions, any advice to people that are struggling with some of the same things you're working through right now, any ideas, anything you're looking forward to. It's your chance to offer one last tidbit before we sign off here. And Erica, I'm going to pick on you first. Give us your parting shot.
Pressure's on. I would say that my parting shot is I'm very excited about where our industry is today and where it's going. It's grown so much, and I've been lucky enough to sort of see it from its infancy, back in 2007, 2008, when RAs are really just becoming a thing. And I see the space getting more mature, especially when we talk about the marketing and organic growth. I love to see the new talent that's coming into the space. And so I just encourage the marketing and the organic growth folks to, continue pushing forward and driving the industry to its maturity.
And Amy.
Well, thank you for having me on here. I'm really excited to continue to have more of these conversations. I would say, ideas are ideas, and it all comes down to the execution. So us having lots of conversations about all of our ideas is you're not really giving anything away, right? Because you still got to put so much work into actually executing on any of this. And so I love these conversations and developing more of a network here. So thank you for pulling me and Erica together. And I think there's just so much we can learn from each other.
Well, yeah, I'll be calling you.
Yeah. What are you doing with this thing? Yeah.
Well, and I appreciate that. And a big part of what I see as a real challenge for the world of growth and marketing is that no one's minting professionals in these roles. It's an outgrowth of something else you did. Let's be honest. Whether it's business consulting, practice management, you're a sales assistant for an advisor team. It could be any one of these tracks. You could have a power planner, didn't like the client side and wanted to end up doing all the marketing for a firm. I've seen it so many different ways. And I think because of that, there's a lot of learning as you go. Even for people that are quite accomplished to get a lot done, there's always learning as you go. I don't think there's any single person who I think is doing an awesome job would say, I'm all done here, I got it all cooked. Because every one of these CMOs I talk to in this podcast or otherwise, they feel like there's something else they got to learn. So I think the process is so important. And I think because so much changes, that having these conversations, as you say, Amy, is so important. So I appreciate you, both of you, taking the time to be honest, thoughtful, and sharing your ideas here. And thanks again for joining the Marketing Matchup. Again, Erica Rodrigues with Constellation Wealth Capital and Amy Rizzo with Arax Investment Partners. Thank you both.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe. Nice to meet you, Amy.
Thank you, Erica.
Thanks for listening to Marketing Matchup, a production of Gregory. If you like what you heard, please listen and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.